My stepfamily threw every single photo I had of my childhood into the fireplace while I watched. They called them worthless memories from a dead man's house and laughed as flames consumed the only proof I had of my connection to the Rodriguez family. What they didn't know was that one of those photos contained something that would expose their biggest lie and prove that the mansion they were celebrating inheriting actually belonged to me. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just smiled because while they were busy destroying evidence, I had already found the hidden room that changed everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The marriage certificate was still warm from the printer when Patricia Chen moved into our family home on Evergreen Terrace. I was 14, and within 6 months, everything I thought I knew about my place in the Rodriguez family had been systematically erased. Patricia arrived with Tyler and Madison, her 2 children from her previous marriage, and suddenly our 4-bedroom house felt like a hotel where I was the unwelcome guest who had overstayed their reservation. Patricia wasted no time establishing the new hierarchy. Tyler, who was 2 years older than me, immediately claimed the larger bedroom that had been mine since childhood. When I protested to my father David, he just shrugged and said we needed to make everyone feel welcome. Madison took over the art studio where I used to paint with my mother before she passed when I was 8. The room that once smelled like watercolors and dreams was transformed into Madison's Instagram-worthy makeup and fashion staging area, complete with ring lights and a backdrop wall. But the cruelest change came to the family photos lining our hallway. One by one, pictures of my mother disappeared, replaced by Patricia's carefully curated family portraits. The wedding photo of my parents that had sat on the mantel for 16 years vanished overnight, replaced by a new family portrait featuring David, Patricia, Tyler, Madison, and somewhere in the back corner barely visible. When I asked where my mother's pictures had gone, Patricia smiled sweetly and said they were safely stored away so we could focus on our new family memories. The only person who seemed to notice what was happening was Great-Uncle Sam. Samuel Rodriguez had been my mother's favorite uncle, a man who never married but treated his extended family like his greatest treasure. He lived alone in the old family mansion in the Pearl District, a sprawling 1920s Tudor that had been in the Rodriguez family for 3 generations. Every Sunday he would pick me up in his vintage Buick, and we would spend the afternoon in his library, surrounded by books that smelled like vanilla, and stories that felt like home. Uncle Sam had a way of seeing things that others missed. He noticed when I stopped talking about school art projects, when I started eating lunch alone in my room, when I began wearing headphones at the dinner table to avoid Patricia's passive-aggressive comments about my attitude problem. He never directly criticized my father's new wife, but he would look at me with those sharp brown eyes and say things like, "Emma, Mia, remember that home isn't just where you live, it's where people see you for who you really are." During our Sunday visits, Uncle Sam would pull out photo albums dating back to the 1940s, showing me pictures of Rodriguez family gatherings, construction projects, and celebrations. His favorite photos were from the 1960s when my grandfather had started Rodriguez Construction and Development. "Your abuelo built this family's foundation with his bare hands," Uncle Sam would tell me, pointing to black and white photographs of construction sites and ribbon-cutting ceremonies. Every building, every project, every success, it all started with his vision and our family's sweat. These photo sessions became my lifeline. While Patricia worked to erase my mother's memory from our house, Uncle Sam preserved it in living color. He had pictures of my mother as a little girl, playing in the mansion's garden. Photos of her high school graduation, her wedding day, even candid shots of her pregnant with me, glowing with happiness in the same library where we now sat. "She loved this house," Uncle Sam would say softly. "She always said it felt like the heart of our family." When I turned 18, Patricia's behavior shifted from passive-aggressive to openly hostile. She had successfully positioned Tyler and Madison as David's real children, while I became the reminder of his past that needed to be managed. Tyler was enrolled in Portland State's business program, funded entirely by my father, with plans to eventually take over Rodriguez Construction. Madison received a brand new Honda Civic for her 16th birthday, and a monthly allowance that exceeded what most college students lived on. Meanwhile, I was told that if I wanted to attend college, I would need to figure out the financing myself because family resources were stretched thin. The breaking point came during Christmas dinner of my senior year. Patricia had decorated the entire house in silver and white, claiming it was more sophisticated than our family's traditional red and green theme. She served prime rib instead of the tamales and pozole that had been our Christmas tradition for decades. When I mentioned that I missed our old traditions, Madison laughed and said, "Emma, you can't live in the past forever. Mom's way is so much better." That's when Uncle Sam cleared his throat and set down his fork. "Patricia," he said in a voice that was quiet but carried the weight of authority, "this family has celebrated Christmas the same way for 50 years. My brother would roll over in his grave if he knew his traditions were being thrown away like garbage." The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Patricia's smile became razor sharp as she replied, "Well, Sam, fortunately we're making new traditions now. The past is exactly that, past." Uncle Sam didn't argue. He simply stood up, kissed my forehead, and said, "Emma, would you walk me to my car?" Outside in the cold December air, he pressed a brass key into my palm. "This opens the safety deposit box at First National," he whispered. "Box number 247. If anything happens to me, or if they try to push you out completely, you go there first. Promise me." I promised, though I had no idea what he was preparing me for. 3 months later, Uncle Sam suffered a massive heart attack while working in his garden. He was 78 years old, and had seemed invincible right up until the moment he wasn't. The funeral was a blur of black clothes and condolences, but what I remember most clearly was Patricia's behavior. She cried louder than anyone, clutching David's arm and speaking in broken sentences about how devastated she was to lose such a wonderful man. Her performance was so convincing that distant relatives actually comforted her, while I stood in the back, dry-eyed and suspicious. The will reading took place the following Tuesday at Walsh & Associates downtown. Miss Rebecca Walsh, Uncle Sam's lawyer for over 20 years, had arranged the meeting in her conference room overlooking the Willamette River. Patricia arrived, dressed in black Chanel, her hair perfectly styled despite her supposed grief. Tyler and Madison flanked her like bodyguards, while David sat stiffly in his best suit. I wore the simple black dress I had bought for my mother's funeral years earlier, feeling like an intruder at my own family gathering. Miss Walsh opened the proceedings with formal language about Uncle Sam's final wishes and testamentary capacity. Then she began reading the specific bequests. To Tyler Chen, "I leave my collection of vintage tools and my workshop in the mansion's basement, trusting that he will learn the value of building things with his own hands." Tyler smirked.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Clearly expecting much more. To Madison Chen, "I leave my first edition books and hope that she will discover the joy of reading stories that don't appear on a screen." Madison's face fell as she realized that Uncle Sam's valuable book collection consisted mostly of beat-up paperbacks and family histories. Patricia's hands clenched in her lap as Miss Walsh continued. To David Rodriguez, "My nephew, I leave the responsibility of maintaining the family burial plot and the hope that he will remember where he came from." David shifted uncomfortably, perhaps sensing that this wasn't going to be the windfall Patricia had anticipated. Then Miss Walsh's voice changed, becoming warmer and more personal. To Emma Rodriguez, "My great-niece and the keeper of our family's true spirit, I leave the entirety of my personal estate, including all properties, investments and assets. This includes the family mansion at 1247 Pearl District Boulevard, all contents therein, and the full ownership of Rodriguez Construction and Development, which has been held in trust under my name since 1987. The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Tyler lurched forward as if he was going to grab something, while Madison started crying, not sad tears, but angry, frustrated sobs. David looked like someone had hit him with a brick. "That's impossible," Patricia finally managed to say. "The company belongs to David, he's been running it for 20 years. Miss Walsh adjusted her glasses and pulled out a thick folder. "Actually, Mrs. Rodriguez, David has been operating the company under a management agreement. The actual ownership has remained with Samuel Rodriguez since he bought out his brother's share in 1987 following some financial difficulties. The arrangement was that David would manage operations while Sam maintained ownership, with the understanding that ownership would eventually transfer to the next generation of Rodriguez family members." I felt like I was floating outside my body, watching this scene unfold from somewhere near the ceiling. Uncle Sam had never mentioned owning the company. I had assumed, like everyone else, that David had built the business himself, but as Miss Walsh explained the legal structure, pieces began falling into place. The reason Uncle Sam always seemed to know about the company's projects before David mentioned them at dinner. The way contractors and suppliers treated Uncle Sam with a deference that went beyond respect for an elderly family member. The monthly visits that I now realized were business meetings disguised as social calls. Patricia's composure finally cracked completely. She stood up so fast her chair toppled backward, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at me like I was personally responsible for ruining her life. "This is ridiculous. She's just a kid. She doesn't know anything about running a business. David has worked his entire life building that company." Her voice rose to a near shriek as she continued. "And that house should belong to family, real family, not some ungrateful child who never appreciated what she had." Miss Walsh remained calm as Patricia's tantrum escalated. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I understand this is surprising, but the will is completely legal and properly executed. Mr. Samuel Rodriguez was of sound mind when he made these decisions, and he updated his will as recently as 6 months ago to ensure his wishes were clearly stated." She turned to me with a gentle smile. "Emma, your great-uncle left specific instructions for you. He wanted you to know that this inheritance comes with a responsibility to preserve the Rodriguez family legacy for future generations." But Patricia wasn't finished. Her face had turned an alarming shade of red as she continued her rant. "She doesn't deserve any of this. She's not even really family anymore, she's just David's baggage from his first marriage. Sam was a lonely old man who got manipulated by a teenager who probably just felt sorry for him." Tyler and Madison nodded along with their mother's outburst, as if her rage justified their own disappointment. That's when David finally spoke up, but not in the way I had hoped. Instead of defending me or acknowledging the truth about the company's ownership, he sided with his new family. "Emma," he said in a voice that sounded tired and defeated, "maybe we should contest this. Uncle Sam was getting older, and he might not have understood the full implications of what he was doing. This inheritance is too much responsibility for someone your age." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. My own father was suggesting that I was too immature and incompetent to handle an inheritance from the man who had been more of a parent to me than David himself had been in recent years. I looked around the conference room at these people who were supposed to be my family, and I realized that Uncle Sam had known exactly what he was doing. He had seen what I was too naive to recognize, that Patricia's plan had always been to erase me from the Rodriguez family entirely, starting with my mother's memory and ending with my complete exclusion from our family's legacy. Miss Walsh must have sensed the tension because she quickly wrapped up the formal proceedings. "The estate will need to go through probate, which typically takes several months. Emma, I'll need to meet with you separately to discuss the details of managing your inheritance. For now, the mansion and all its contents are legally yours, though you should probably wait until the dust settles before making any major changes." As we filed out of the conference room, Patricia grabbed my arm with a grip that would leave bruises. "Don't think this is over," she hissed in my ear. "That old man filled your head with fantasies, but reality is going to hit you hard. You have no idea what you're getting yourself into." Her threat was delivered with a smile, as if she was giving me friendly advice instead of a warning. But the real shock came when we arrived at the mansion that evening. I had assumed that I would be able to move in gradually, maybe spend some time going through Uncle Sam's belongings and deciding what to keep. Instead, I found Patricia, Tyler, and Madison already there, loading boxes into a moving truck with an efficiency that suggested they had been planning this for days. When I asked what they were doing, Patricia looked at me with fake sympathy and said, "Oh honey, we're just clearing out some of the old junk to make room for the important things. You wouldn't want to be overwhelmed by all this clutter." I walked into the house and felt my heart stop. The living room, which had been filled with Uncle Sam's comfortable furniture and family photos, was now stripped bare except for the pieces Patricia had deemed worth keeping. But it was the library that made me understand the true scope of what was happening. The built-in bookshelves that had housed Uncle Sam's collection of family histories, photo albums, and personal papers were completely empty. When I asked where everything had gone, Madison shrugged and said, "Mom thought you might want to start fresh. All that old stuff was just taking up space." That's when I noticed the fireplace. It was still warm, with ashes and partially burned fragments scattered across the hearth. As I knelt down to examine the debris more closely, I realized what I was looking at: the charred remains of photographs. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, reduced to blackened scraps and ash. I could make out fragments of faces, pieces of the mansion's rooms, corners of birthday parties and Christmas mornings. All of Uncle Sam's carefully preserved family memories, all the photos that had connected me to my mother and my heritage, deliberately destroyed. Patricia appeared behind me as I crouched by the fireplace, her voice dripping with false concern. "Oh Emma, I'm so sorry you had to see this mess." Tyler was trying to help by starting a fire to warm up the house, and some old papers accidentally got mixed in. You know how these old houses can be, so many random documents and pictures just stuffed everywhere. We tried to save what we could, but most of it was too damaged by smoke and age anyway. Her lie was so brazen, so casually delivered, that for a moment I couldn't even respond. Tyler stood behind her with his arms crossed, not even bothering to look sorry about his accident. Madison was taking selfies by the window, apparently bored by the whole situation, and David, my father, just stood there saying nothing, as if watching his daughter's inheritance literally go up in smoke was perfectly acceptable collateral damage. But as I knelt there among the ashes of my family's history, something caught my eye. A fragment of a photograph had survived the flames, wedged behind one of the fireplace grates where the fire couldn't reach it. I palmed it quickly before anyone could see, slipping it into my pocket while Patricia continued her performance of regret and Tyler maintained his slouched posture of indifference. Later that night, alone in my apartment, I examined the photo fragment under my desk lamp. It was just a corner of a larger picture, showing part of Uncle Sam's library, and what appeared to be his hand pointing toward something on the wall. There were numbers visible in the background, partially obscured, but still readable if you knew what to look for. The numbers 1923 were clearly visible, which I knew was the year the mansion had been built. But there was something else, a sequence that looked like it might be coordinates or measurements. I spent the rest of the night going through every document Miss Walsh had given me, looking for any reference to those numbers or any clue about what Uncle Sam might have been pointing toward in that photograph. The mansion's original blueprints were included in the estate papers, and as I studied them by lamplight, I noticed something odd. The library's dimensions didn't match the measurements listed on the architectural plans. According to the blueprints, the room should have been 3 feet deeper than it actually appeared to be. The next morning, I drove back to the mansion with a measuring tape and a flashlight, determined to solve the puzzle Uncle Sam had left me. Patricia's car was gone, which meant she was probably at the bank, trying to figure out how to challenge the will or freeze my assets. The house felt different without Uncle Sam's presence, bigger and colder, like a museum instead of a home. I went straight to the library and began measuring the walls, comparing my findings to the original blueprints. The discrepancy was even more obvious in person. The far wall, the one lined with built-in bookshelves, was definitely not where it should be according to the architectural plans. I ran my hands along the wood paneling, looking for any irregularities or hidden mechanisms. Uncle Sam had been a reader of mystery novels and a lover of old movies. If anyone would have appreciated the drama of a hidden room, it would have been him. It took me almost 2 hours to find it. The trigger wasn't obvious, no hidden buttons or secret levers. Instead, it was a specific sequence of books that needed to be pulled in the right order. The photo fragment had shown Uncle Sam pointing toward a particular section of the shelf, and when I examined that area more closely, I noticed that certain books seemed newer than others, as if they had been handled more frequently. The sequence was embedded in the dates on the book spines: 1923, the year the house was built, followed by 1954, the year my grandparents were married, then 1978, the year my mother was born. When I pulled those 3 books in order, I heard a soft click, followed by the sound of mechanisms moving behind the wall. The entire bookshelf section swung inward on hidden hinges, revealing a space that shouldn't have existed according to any official records. The hidden room was small, but perfectly preserved, like a time capsule that had been waiting decades for someone to discover it. The air smelled like cedar and old paper, and when I found the light switch, warm yellow bulbs illuminated what looked like a private office or study. There was a desk covered with papers, filing cabinets filled with documents, and most importantly, walls lined with photographs and legal documents that told a story I had never heard before. The photos on the walls weren't just family pictures, they were a visual history of Rodriguez construction and development dating back to its founding. But these weren't the official company photos that hung in David's office. These showed the real story, including images of Patricia meeting with competitors, documents proving she had been selling company information to rival firms, and correspondence that revealed a plan to systematically destroy the Rodriguez family's control over their own business. One entire wall was dedicated to what Uncle Sam had labeled Patricia's real agenda. There were photos of her at business meetings with people I didn't recognize, copies of bank records showing payments from competing construction companies, and most damaging of all, a recorded conversation where she discussed her plan to eliminate the Rodriguez influence and secure Tyler's position as the rightful heir. The recording equipment was still there, sophisticated enough to capture clear audio from the main house while remaining completely hidden. But the most shocking discovery was a complete second will, properly notarized and filed with a different law firm that told a very different story about Uncle Sam's intentions. This will, dated just 1 month before his death, didn't just leave me the house and the company, it exposed Patricia's embezzlement scheme and provided evidence that she had been systematically stealing from Rodriguez Construction for over 5 years. The amounts were staggering, totaling nearly $2 million that had been funneled into accounts controlled by Patricia and her children. Uncle Sam had known everything: the Sunday visits, the photo sessions, the family dinners where he watched Patricia's performance. He had been documenting her crimes the entire time, building a case that would not only protect me but destroy her credibility completely. There were copies of forged invoices, evidence of kickback schemes, and proof that Tyler had been enrolled in college using money stolen from company accounts that Patricia had managed to access through David's trusting negligence. As I sat in that hidden room surrounded by evidence of Patricia's betrayal, I understood why she had been so eager to burn Uncle Sam's photos and clear out his belongings. She hadn't been trying to hurt me, she had been trying to eliminate evidence of her own crimes. The family photos she destroyed weren't just memories, they were proof of family gatherings where business was discussed, meetings where Patricia had access to confidential information that she later sold to competitors. The final piece of the puzzle was a letter addressed to me in Uncle Sam's handwriting, sealed in an envelope marked for Emma's eyes only. Inside, he explained everything: how he had discovered Patricia's scheme, why he had never confronted her directly, and how he had spent the last 2 years of his life building an ironclad case that would ensure justice. Mija, the letter began, by the time you read this, Patricia will have shown her true colors. She will have tried to erase you from this family, just like she erased your mother's memory from your home. But what she doesn't understand is that the Rodriguez family has survived much worse than her kind of greed. The letter went on to detail specific instructions for how to use the evidence, which lawyers to contact, and how to protect myself from Patricia's inevitable counterattack. Uncle Sam had anticipated every move she might make, from challenging the will to trying to claim that I was too young and inexperienced to handle the inheritance. He had even prepared responses to arguments that David might make about the company ownership, including documentation proving that David had been aware of the ownership structure all along, but had chosen to let Patricia believe she was positioning Tyler to inherit something that was never going to be theirs. But Uncle Sam's final paragraph was what made me cry for the first time since his funeral. "Emma, you are the best of this family, because you got your mother's heart and your grandfather's spine. Patricia burned your photos because she was afraid of what they represented. Proof that you belong here, that you are loved, and that you carry our family's true spirit. Don't let her theft of those memories make you forget who you are. You are a Rodriguez, and that means something in this city. Make it mean something good." I spent the rest of that day cataloging everything in the hidden room, photographing documents, and organizing evidence according to Uncle Sam's detailed instructions. By evening, I had enough proof to not only secure my inheritance, but to send Patricia to prison for embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. The woman who had spent 4 years systematically erasing me from my own family was about to discover that she had been outmaneuvered by a man she had underestimated at a burr she had tried to destroy. When I finally left the mansion that night, I wasn't the same person who had discovered the hidden room that morning. I was no longer the displaced stepdaughter begging for scraps of recognition from a family that had already written me off. I was the rightful owner of a successful business, the heir to a family legacy that stretched back generations, and the keeper of evidence that would expose Patricia's crimes to the world. She had burned my photos, thinking she was erasing my past, but instead, she had led me to discover a truth that would determine all of our futures. The morning after discovering the hidden room, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Patricia thought she had won by destroying those photographs, but she had actually handed me the key to her own downfall. I made coffee in my tiny kitchen and spread Uncle Sam's evidence across my dining table like a general planning a campaign. Every document told a piece of the story, every photograph revealed another layer of deception, and every recording exposed just how deep Patricia's betrayal ran. The first thing I needed to do was secure everything. Uncle Sam had been smart enough to create multiple copies of the most important documents, storing them in different locations throughout the city. According to his notes, there were safety deposit boxes at 3 different banks, each containing identical sets of evidence. He had also arranged for copies to be held by a private investigator named Marx Chen, no relation to Patricia despite the shared surname, who specialized in corporate fraud cases. I called Marcus from the burner phone Uncle Sam had left in the hidden room, following his instructions about maintaining secrecy until I was ready to strike. Marcus had been expecting my call. "Emma Rodriguez," he said before I even introduced myself, "Sam told me you'd probably need my help eventually. He was a smart man, your great uncle, thorough, the kind of client who makes my job easy because he documented everything." His voice was gravelly, like someone who had spent years asking difficult questions and getting uncomfortable answers. We met at a small diner in southeast Portland, the kind of place where truckers and construction workers grabbed breakfast before dawn. Marcus looked exactly like I had imagined, mid-50s, gray beard, eyes that seemed to see everything and trust nothing. He slid a manila envelope across the worn formica table and said, "Your uncle paid me to investigate Patricia Chen for 18 months. What I found was worse than he suspected. The envelope contains surveillance photos of Patricia meeting with executives from rival construction companies, bank records showing payments into accounts she thought were hidden, and most damaging of all, recordings of phone conversations where she discussed specific Rodriguez construction projects with competitors. In one particularly damaging conversation, she provided detailed information about our company's bid on a major downtown renovation project, allowing a rival firm to underbid us by exactly the margin needed to win the contract. She's been selling your family's business secrets for almost 3 years, Marcus explained, stirring his coffee with the intensity of someone delivering a medical diagnosis. Started small, just information about upcoming projects, details about your company's financial position. But it escalated quickly. She figured out how to access the company accounts through your father's login credentials, and she's been systematically draining money while making it look like legitimate business expenses. The scope of Patricia's crimes was staggering. She had created fake vendor accounts for companies that existed only on paper, billing Rodriguez Construction for services that were never provided. She had inflated actual vendor invoices and pocketed the difference. She had even charged personal expenses, Tyler's college tuition, Madison's car, her own shopping sprees to company credit cards by categorizing them as business development or client entertainment costs. Your father never noticed, because she was smart about it, Marcus continued. She never took enough at once to trigger an audit, and she made sure the company remained profitable enough that David wouldn't ask too many questions. But over time, the amounts added up. We're talking about nearly $2.3 million in total theft, not counting the lost revenue from the projects she helped competitors steal. I stared at the numbers, feeling sick. While I had been struggling to pay for college and working part-time jobs to afford textbooks, Patricia had been stealing enough money to fund multiple college educations. While David told me the family couldn't afford to help with my expenses, Patricia was using company money to buy Madison a car that cost more than most people's annual salary. But Marcus wasn't finished. The really interesting part is what she was planning to do next. Your uncle's death accelerated her timeline, but she was already setting up Tyler to take over the company. She had forged documents prepared that would transfer ownership to him, claiming that your uncle had promised the business to David's legitimate heirs before he died. If you hadn't inherited everything, she probably would have succeeded. The forged documents were sophisticated, complete with fake notary seals and backdated signatures. Patricia had even created a fabricated history of meetings between Uncle Sam and Tyler, supported by falsified calendars and manufactured email exchanges. If I had been any less prepared, if Uncle Sam hadn't anticipated her moves and documented everything, Patricia's version of events might have been believable enough to fool a court. She's not just a thief, Marcus said, sliding another set of photos across the table. She's a predator. She identified your family as a target from the moment she met your father, and she's been systematically working to eliminate any obstacles to her plan. Your mother's photos disappearing from the house, your bedroom being converted, your father's gradual distancing from you, that wasn't coincidence. That was psychological warfare designed to make you give up and walk away. The photos Marcus showed me were surveillance shots taken over several months, documenting Patricia's meetings with a divorce attorney who specialized in complex asset division cases. She had been planning to leave David once she secured control of the company, taking Tyler and Madison with her while leaving my father with nothing but debt and legal problems. Uncle Sam's death had disrupted that timeline, but the meetings with the divorce attorney had continued even after the will reading. She's going to make her move soon, Marcus warned. Probably within the next few weeks. She knows that the longer you have to investigate your inheritance, the more likely you are to discover her crimes. Her plan now is probably to challenge the will while simultaneously filing for divorce and claiming that the company assets belong to the marital estate. She's betting that you don't have the resources or the knowledge to fight back effectively. But Patricia had made one crucial mistake in her calculations. She had assumed that Uncle Sam was just a sentimental old man who felt sorry for his orphaned great-niece. She had never suspected that he was documenting her every move, building a case that would not only protect me but destroy her completely. The hidden room wasn't just a storage space for family memorabilia, it was a command center for a counterintelligence operation that had been running under her nose for over a year. Marcus handed me a business card for a lawyer named Sarah Kim, who specialized in corporate fraud and family law. Sam arranged for her to represent you when the time came. She's already reviewed all the evidence and she's prepared to move fast when you give the word. But Emma, you need to understand what you're getting into. This isn't just about getting your inheritance. This is about sending Patricia to prison. Once you start this process, there's no going back. I thought about Patricia's smug smile as she watched my family photos burn. I remembered the way she had systematically erased my mother's memory from our house, replacing warmth with calculated coldness. I considered how she had manipulated my father into believing that I was the problem, that my presence was somehow threatening to their new family's happiness. And I made my decision. Set up the meeting with Sarah Kim, I told Marcus. It's time to finish what Uncle Sam started. The law offices of Kim and Associates occupied the top floor of a downtown Portland high-rise, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city my family had helped build. Sarah Kim was younger than I had expected, probably in her early 40s, with sharp intelligence in her dark eyes and the kind of confident bearing that suggested she had never lost a case she believed in. "Your great-uncle was very thorough," she said, gesturing to several filing cabinets that apparently contained nothing but evidence against Patricia. "He understood that family legal battles are won or lost based on preparation and documentation. He spent the last year of his life making sure you would have everything you needed to not just defend your inheritance, but to go on the offensive." Sarah spread a timeline across her conference table, showing the progression of Patricia's crimes from her first attempts to access company information through her most recent meetings with divorce attorneys. She's been building toward this moment for years, but she made the mistake of underestimating her opposition. Sam documented everything: financial records, audio recordings, surveillance photos, witness statements. She thought she was manipulating a lonely old man, but she was actually confessing to someone who was building a federal case against her. Federal case. The word sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't just about civil litigation or family court disputes. Patricia's crimes crossed state lines, involved wire fraud, and included sophisticated money laundering schemes that fell under federal jurisdiction. Uncle Sam had been coordinating with FBI investigators for months, providing evidence of Patricia's activities as part of a larger investigation into corporate fraud in the construction industry. "The FBI has been watching her for 6 months, Sarah explained. Your uncle's evidence helped them identify a network of individuals who were stealing trade secrets and manipulating bids across multiple companies. Patricia wasn't working alone. She was part of an organized effort to corrupt the construction industry in Portland. The money she stole from your family was just one piece of a much larger criminal enterprise." I felt like Alice falling down the rabbit hole, discovering that the world I thought I knew was just a surface layer, hiding something much more complex and dangerous. Patricia wasn't just a greedy stepmother who wanted to secure her children's future. She was a professional criminal who had targeted my family as part of a systematic operation to steal and manipulate. "What happens now?" I asked, feeling overwhelmed by the scope of what Uncle Sam had uncovered. "Now we spring the trap," Sarah said with a smile that reminded me of a shark sensing blood in the water. "Patricia is going to file her challenge to the will on Friday. She's also going to serve divorce papers on your father and attempt to freeze all Rodriguez construction assets. She thinks she's about to win the biggest payday of her life. Instead, she's about to walk into a federal courthouse where agents will be waiting to arrest her for wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. We would let Patricia make her moves, allowing her to commit additional crimes by filing false documents and making fraudulent claims about the company's ownership. Every lie she told under oath would add years to her eventual prison sentence. Every forged document she submitted would provide additional evidence of her criminal intent. "Your father is going to be collateral damage," Sarah warned. He's not criminally liable for Patricia's actions, but he's going to lose everything. His wife, his stepchildren, probably his house. The FBI investigation will require a complete audit of Rodriguez Construction, which means David's management of the company will be scrutinized. He won't go to prison, but his reputation in the industry will be destroyed. I thought about my father, the man who had chosen Patricia's version of family over his own daughter. Part of me felt sorry for him. He had been manipulated just as much as I had, maybe more. But another part of me remembered how he had stood silently while Patricia burned my photos, how he had suggested that I was too immature to handle my inheritance, how he had allowed his new wife to erase every trace of my mother from our family home. He made his choices, I said finally. I can't protect him from the consequences. Sarah nodded approvingly. That's the right attitude. In situations like this, you have to choose between justice and keeping the peace. You can't have both. We spent the rest of the afternoon going over the timeline for the coming confrontation. Patricia would file her legal challenges on Friday morning, confident that she held all the cards. By Friday afternoon, federal agents would be executing search warrants on her home, her bank accounts, and her electronic devices. Tyler and Madison would discover that their college funds were actually proceeds from criminal activity. David would learn that his wife of 4 years had been systematically destroying the business his father had built. What about the mansion? I asked. Patricia's been treating it like her personal property since Uncle Sam died. That stops tomorrow, Sarah said firmly. We're filing an emergency injunction to prevent any further removal or destruction of estate property. As of tomorrow morning, Patricia and her children will be barred from entering the mansion without your explicit permission. We're also filing charges for destruction of property related to the photos she burned. The destruction of those photos had been more than just cruel vandalism. It had been an attempt to destroy evidence of family relationships and historical connections that supported my inheritance claim. Uncle Sam had documented the emotional and financial value of those photographs, including professional appraisals that established their worth as irreplaceable family artifacts. Patricia's decision to burn them would add several additional felony charges to her growing list of crimes. As I left Sarah's office that evening, I felt like I was carrying the weight of destiny on my shoulders. Uncle Sam had spent the last year of his life preparing me for this moment, building a case that would not only secure my future but expose the truth about Patricia's systematic betrayal of our family. The scared, displaced teenager who had watched her photos burn was about to become the instrument of justice that would send her stepmother to federal prison. I drove back to the mansion as the sun was setting, using my new keys to enter the house that was now legally mine. The rooms felt different now that I understood their true significance, not just as Uncle Sam's home but as the heart of a family legacy that Patricia had tried to steal. I walked through each room slowly, seeing everything with new eyes. In the kitchen, I noticed the expensive appliances that Patricia had installed, using stolen company money. In the living room, I recognized furniture that Tyler had claimed belonged to his real family but had actually been purchased with funds embezzled from Rodriguez Construction. Even Madison's bedroom decorations, the ring lights and backdrop that had replaced my mother's art studio, had been paid for with money stolen from the business my grandfather had built. But it was the library that held the most significance now. Standing in front of the hidden room's entrance, I realized that Uncle Sam had created more than just a storage space. He had built a shrine to truth, a place where reality was preserved against Patricia's attempts to rewrite history. Every document in that room represented his faith that justice would eventually prevail, that someone would care enough about our family's legacy to fight for it. I spent that night in Uncle Sam's bedroom, sleeping in the house that was now mine for the first time since inheriting it. As I lay in the darkness, I could almost feel his presence, the satisfaction of a man who had outmaneuvered enemies who thought they were smarter than he was. Patricia had burned my photos thinking she was erasing my connection to the Rodriguez family. Instead, she had led me to discover evidence that would not only restore my place in that family, but elevate me to its head. Tomorrow, the real battle would begin. Patricia would file her legal challenges, confident that she had eliminated all opposition to her plans. Instead, she would discover that Uncle Sam had been planning for this confrontation since the day she first entered our family. The woman who had spent years systematically destroying everything I cared about was about to learn that some things cannot be burned, cannot be stolen, and cannot be erased. The hidden room had revealed more than just evidence of Patricia's crimes. It had revealed the depth of Uncle Sam's love for our family and his determination to protect its future. He had given me not just an inheritance, but the tools to reclaim everything that had been taken from us. And I was ready to use them. Friday morning arrived with the kind of gray Portland drizzle that made everything look washed out and melancholy. I sat in my car outside the Multnomah County Courthouse, watching Patricia stride up the steps in her best power suit, flanked by her attorney, and wearing the expression of someone who believed victory was already assured. She moved with the confidence of a woman who had never lost a battle that mattered, carrying herself like she owned not just the courthouse steps, but the entire justice system itself. Tyler and Madison followed behind her, dressed in their finest clothes, as if they were attending a celebration rather than a legal proceeding. Tyler wore the same smirk he had displayed while watching my photos burn, while Madison documented the moment with her phone, probably planning to post about their family's legal victory on social media before the ink was dry on the court documents. David brought up the rear, looking uncomfortable in a suit that seemed too tight, his face carrying the expression of a man who wasn't entirely sure what he was supporting but felt obligated to show up anyway. I waited until they had disappeared into the building before making my own entrance. Sarah Kim had advised me to arrive separately, to avoid any confrontation that might be used to paint me as the aggressor in this situation. My role today was to appear calm, mature, and completely unprepared for what Patricia was about to attempt. The performance required me to look like exactly what Patricia believed I was, a naive young woman who was about to be outmaneuvered by professionals who understood how the world really worked. The courthouse lobby buzzed with the usual Friday morning activity, lawyers consulting with clients, families dealing with various legal crises, and court personnel moving between hearings with the efficient boredom of people who had seen every possible variation of human conflict. I found Sarah waiting near the elevator, looking professional and slightly predatory in her charcoal gray suit. She gave me a small nod that conveyed both reassurance and anticipation. "She filed everything exactly as we predicted," Sarah said quietly as we rode the elevator to the third floor. Challenge to the will, based on undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity, emergency motion to freeze all estate assets pending resolution, and the piece de resistance, a petition claiming that Rodriguez construction should be considered part of the marital estate subject to division in her divorce proceedings. The divorce papers had been served on David that morning at his office, in front of his entire staff and several clients. According to Sarah's sources, the scene had been spectacular. Patricia's attorney had timed the service to coincide with a meeting between David and potential investors, ensuring maximum humiliation and professional damage. David had apparently been so shocked that he had to cancel the rest of his appointments and spend the morning trying to understand how his marriage had imploded overnight. The beauty of her strategy is also its fatal flaw, Sarah continued as we walked toward the courtroom. Every document she filed this morning contains statements that we can prove are false. Every claim she made under oath can be contradicted with evidence she doesn't know we have. She's not just challenging your inheritance, she's committing perjury in federal court while we watch. Judge Patricia Hendricks presided over the probate court with the kind of no-nonsense efficiency that suggested she had limited patience for legal theatrics. She was known for her sharp intellect and her ability to see through attempts to manipulate the system, which made her the perfect judge for what was about to unfold. Sarah had requested this specific courtroom, knowing that Judge Hendricks would not be easily swayed by Patricia's performance or intimidated by her legal team's reputation. Patricia's attorney, Robert Morrison, was exactly what I had expected: expensive suit, practiced smile, and the kind of polished confidence that came from winning cases through superior resources rather than superior arguments. He had built his career representing wealthy clients in high-stakes family disputes, specializing in the art of making complex legal situations appear simple while obscuring inconvenient facts behind clouds of procedural technicalities. Morrison began his presentation with the smooth confidence of someone delivering a speech he had given dozens of times before. "Your Honor, we are here today because a vulnerable elderly man was manipulated by a young woman who took advantage of his loneliness and declining mental capacity. Samuel Rodriguez was systematically isolated from his true family and convinced to change his will in favor of someone who had shown no interest in maintaining family relationships until she smelled an opportunity for financial gain." The lies came so smoothly that I almost admired Morrison's skill at delivering complete fiction with the gravity of established fact. According to his version of events, I had deliberately estranged myself from my family in order to position myself as Uncle Sam's sole confidant. He painted a picture of a calculating teenager who had recognized an aging man's vulnerability and exploited it for financial gain, systematically turning him against his real family while feeding him stories designed to make him doubt their loyalty. Miss Rodriguez abandoned her family when she turned 18, rejecting their love and support in favor of pursuing an unrealistic artistic career that demonstrated her fundamental immaturity and poor judgment. Morrison continued, his voice carrying the kind of practiced sympathy that suggested he genuinely felt sorry for Patricia's family. "She maintained contact with Samuel Rodriguez only when she needed financial assistance, treating him as a personal bank rather than a beloved relative." Morrison's description of my relationship with Uncle Sam was so distorted that it barely resembled reality. According to him, our Sunday visits had been calculated manipulation sessions where I fed Uncle Sam lies about Patricia's treatment of me while simultaneously requesting money for various personal expenses. He claimed that I had deliberately poisoned Uncle Sam's relationship with David's new family by exaggerating minor conflicts and presenting normal family adjustments as emotional abuse. The will in question was executed during a period when Samuel Rodriguez was experiencing significant cognitive decline, as evidenced by his increasing isolation from longtime friends and his growing paranoia about family members who had previously enjoyed his complete trust. Morrison said, producing medical records that had apparently been obtained through mysterious channels. The beneficiary took advantage of his confusion and loneliness to convince him that his own family was plotting against him. The medical records were fabricated, but they looked convincing enough to fool someone who hadn't seen the real documentation of Uncle Sam's mental state. Morrison had created a narrative of cognitive decline supported by falsified doctors' reports and manufactured evidence of erratic behavior. According to these documents, Uncle Sam had been suffering from early-stage dementia that affected his judgment while leaving his basic functions intact. Patricia sat at the plaintiff's table, looking appropriately sorrowful, playing the role of a grieving family member who was being forced to take legal action against someone she cared about. She had mastered the art of appearing simultaneously strong and vulnerable, conveying the impression that this legal challenge was causing her tremendous emotional pain but was necessary to protect her family's interests. Occasionally, she would dab at her eyes with a tissue, though I never saw any actual tears. Tyler provided a witness statement describing Uncle Sam's allegedly erratic behavior during family gatherings, claiming that the elderly man had become increasingly hostile toward Patricia and her children for no apparent reason. According to Tyler's sworn testimony, Uncle Sam had made paranoid statements about people trying to steal from him and had accused Patricia of crimes that existed only in his confused imagination. Madison's statement focused on my supposed manipulation of Uncle Sam, describing scenes where I had allegedly made him cry by telling him stories about how Patricia was mistreating me. She painted herself as an innocent bystander who had watched in horror as I systematically turned a beloved family member against people who loved him, using his emotional vulnerability to secure financial advantages for myself. Even David had provided a statement, though his was more restrained than the others. He testified that Uncle Sam had become increasingly withdrawn and suspicious in his final months, making accusations that seemed inconsistent with the reality of their family situation. David claimed that he had tried to maintain a relationship with his uncle but had been gradually shut out as I gained more influence over the elderly man's decisions. The entire presentation was a masterpiece of calculated deception, supported by forged documents and false testimony that created a completely fictional version of events. Morrison had built a case that would have been compelling if the defense hadn't possessed evidence that contradicted every single claim being made. Sarah Kim sat calmly throughout the presentation, occasionally taking notes but showing no signs of concern about the accusations being leveled against me. When Morrison finished his opening statement, Judge Hendricks turned to Sarah with the expectant expression of someone who was curious to hear how the defense planned to respond to such serious allegations. Sarah stood slowly, her movements deliberate and confident, carrying herself like someone who was about to reveal information that would change everything. Your Honor, the plaintiff's presentation is certainly creative, but it suffers from one significant flaw, Sarah began, her voice carrying the kind of calm authority that suggested she was completely unfazed by Morrison's theatrical performance. Every single claim they have made can be proven false through evidence that the plaintiff was unaware existed. Sarah activated the courtroom's projection system and began displaying documents that I recognized from Uncle Sam's hidden room. The first image was a photograph of Patricia meeting with executives from Cascade Construction, Rodriguez Construction's primary competitor, taken just 6 weeks before Uncle Sam's death. The meeting had occurred at an upscale restaurant downtown, and the surveillance photos clearly showed Patricia handing over documents while receiving what appeared to be an envelope containing cash. This photograph was taken as part of an ongoing investigation into corporate espionage in the Portland construction industry. Sarah explained, her voice maintaining the same calm tone as she destroyed Morrison's carefully constructed narrative. The woman in the photograph is Patricia Chen, and she is in the process of selling confidential information about Rodriguez Construction's upcoming bids to representatives of a competing firm. Morrison objected immediately, claiming that the photographs were irrelevant to the question of Uncle Sam's testamentary capacity, but Judge Hendricks overruled him with the sharp efficiency of someone who recognized that these images were about to fundamentally change the nature of the proceedings. Sarah continued her presentation, displaying bank records that showed regular payments from shell companies controlled by Cascade Construction into accounts that Patricia had established under false names. Samuel Rodriguez was not suffering from dementia or cognitive decline, Sarah continued, displaying Uncle Sam's actual medical records from his personal physician. He was conducting a careful investigation into systematic theft and corporate espionage being perpetrated by the plaintiff. His supposed paranoias about family members was actually well-founded suspicion based on documented criminal activity. The real medical records painted a completely different picture of Uncle Sam's mental state. His doctor had noted that he was sharp, focused, and deeply concerned about family business matters that were causing him significant stress. The records included notes about Uncle Sam's request for referrals to private investigators and attorneys who specialized in corporate fraud. Hardly the actions of someone suffering from cognitive decline.
Sarah's next exhibit was a recording of Patricia's voice, clear and unmistakable, discussing specific details about Rodriguez Construction's financial position with someone who was obviously not a family member. The conversation had been recorded in Uncle Sam's kitchen during a family dinner, using equipment that Patricia had never suspected existed. Her voice carried none of the emotional vulnerability she was currently displaying in court as she coldly analyzed ways to manipulate company bidding processes for maximum profit. The plaintiff has built her case on the assumption that Samuel Rodriguez was an isolated, confused elderly man who was easily manipulated, Sarah said, advancing to the next exhibit. In reality, he was a sharp businessman who recognized that his family was being systematically betrayed and robbed.
His decision to change his will was not the result of undue influence, it was a carefully considered response to documented criminal activity. The courtroom had fallen completely silent except for the sound of Patricia's attorney frantically shuffling through papers, trying to find some response to evidence he hadn't known existed. Patricia herself had gone pale, her carefully constructed mask of sorrowful dignity beginning to crack as she realized that her secrets were being exposed in open court. Tyler and Madison looked confused rather than concerned, apparently still not understanding the full scope of what was being revealed. Sarah displayed financial records showing the true extent of Patricia's theft from Rodriguez Construction, including documentation of fake vendor accounts, inflated invoices, and personal expenses charged to company credit cards. The amounts were staggering when presented as a comprehensive total, representing years of systematic embezzlement that had weakened the company's financial position while enriching Patricia and her children. The plaintiff claims that Emma Rodriguez manipulated Samuel Rodriguez into changing his will. Sarah continued, her presentation building toward its devastating conclusion. The evidence shows that Samuel Rodriguez changed his will because he discovered that the plaintiff had been stealing from his family's business for over 3 years. He left his estate to Emma Rodriguez because she was the only family member who was not participating in or benefiting from criminal activity. Judge Hendricks had been taking careful notes throughout Sarah's presentation, her expression growing more serious as the scope of Patricia's crimes became clear. She looked up from her notepad with the kind of focused attention that suggested she was beginning to understand that this was no longer a simple probate dispute, but something much more significant. Miss Kim, are you suggesting that this court is being asked to validate a will that was changed in response to ongoing criminal activity by the plaintiff? Judge Hendricks asked, her voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone who was trying to understand the full implications of what she was hearing. That is exactly what I am suggesting, Your Honor, Sarah replied. Furthermore, I am prepared to demonstrate that the plaintiff's challenge to this will is itself part of an ongoing criminal conspiracy to conceal evidence of embezzlement and corporate espionage. The plaintiff is not seeking justice for a manipulated elderly man, she is attempting to use this court to legitimize the proceeds of her criminal activity. Morrison was on his feet immediately, objecting to what he characterized as inflammatory accusations that had no place in a probate proceeding, but his objections carried a note of desperation that suggested he was beginning to understand that his carefully planned case was collapsing around him. Judge Hendricks sustained some of his objections while allowing Sarah to continue with her presentation, clearly recognizing that the evidence being presented was too significant to ignore. Sarah's final exhibit was the most damaging of all, a complete recording of the conversation where Patricia had discussed her plan to eliminate the Rodriguez family's control over their own business. Uncle Sam had captured the entire discussion, including Patricia's detailed explanation of how she intended to position Tyler as the rightful heir while systematically destroying my relationship with my father. Her voice was clear and unmistakable as she outlined strategies for isolating me from the family while securing her children's financial future. Your Honor, this recording was made during a family dinner at Samuel Rodriguez's home, using equipment that he had installed to document what he suspected was criminal activity, Sarah explained as Patricia's recorded voice filled the courtroom. The plaintiff believed she was speaking privately with her children, but she was actually confessing her crimes to the man she was trying to rob. The recording played for nearly 10 minutes, during which Patricia's voice described her systematic campaign to steal from Rodriguez Construction while positioning herself as the victim of family conflict. She discussed specific amounts of money she had taken, methods she had used to conceal her theft, and strategies for ensuring that Tyler would inherit a business that she had been systematically looting for years. By the time the recording ended, Patricia was no longer maintaining her facade of dignified sorrow. Her face had turned an alarming shade of red, and her hands were shaking as she whispered frantically with Morrison, who looked like a man who had just realized that his client had been lying to him about everything. Tyler and Madison finally seemed to understand that something was seriously wrong, though they appeared more confused than frightened. Judge Hendricks looked up from her notes with an expression that suggested she was no longer dealing with a routine probate dispute. Miss Kim, given the serious nature of the allegations you have presented, I think it would be appropriate to suspend these proceedings pending a more thorough investigation of the evidence you have provided. This court cannot validate or invalidate a will when there are credible allegations of ongoing criminal activity that may have influenced the testator's decisions. Sarah nodded respectfully. Your Honor, I should inform the court that federal investigators have been reviewing this evidence for several months as part of a larger investigation into corporate fraud in the Portland construction industry. The FBI has issued warrants for the plaintiff's arrest that will be executed as soon as these proceedings conclude. The words hit the courtroom like a physical force. Patricia let out a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a scream, while Morrison looked like he was considering whether it was possible to withdraw from representation in the middle of a hearing. David, who had been sitting in the back of the courtroom looking confused and uncomfortable, suddenly stood up as if he was planning to leave, then sat back down when he realized that running away would only make things worse. Judge Hendricks called for a brief recess, during which I watched Patricia argue frantically with her attorney while Tyler and Madison sat in stunned silence. Through the courtroom windows, I could see unmarked vehicles pulling up outside the courthouse, confirming Sarah's warning that federal agents were indeed waiting to arrest Patricia as soon as the hearing concluded. When court resumed, Morrison made a desperate attempt to distance his client from the evidence that had been presented, arguing that the recordings and photographs might have been manipulated or taken out of context. But Judge Hendricks cut him off with the kind of judicial efficiency that suggested she had heard enough. Given the serious nature of the allegations and evidence presented today, this court finds that Samuel Rodriguez's will appears to have been executed with full knowledge of relevant facts and circumstances, Judge Hendricks announced. The challenge to the will is denied. Furthermore, this court is ordering a complete freeze on all assets pending resolution of the criminal investigation that appears to be ongoing. Patricia's world collapsed in that moment. The inheritance she had been planning to steal was confirmed as legally mine. The divorce that was supposed to give her control over Rodriguez Construction was rendered meaningless since she had never actually owned any part of the business. And most importantly, the criminal evidence that Uncle Sam had spent months collecting was now part of the official court record, making it impossible for her to claim that she was being falsely accused. As we left the courtroom, I could see federal agents moving into position near the exits. Patricia would be arrested before she reached her car, charged with crimes that would likely send her to federal prison for decades. Tyler and Madison would discover that their college funds were proceeds from criminal activity, subject to forfeiture as part of their mother's prosecution. David would lose his wife, his stepchildren, and quite possibly his freedom if investigators determined that he had been aware of Patricia's crimes. The woman who had burned my photos thinking she was erasing my past had just discovered that she had actually led me to the evidence that would secure my future while destroying her own. Uncle Sam's careful planning had worked perfectly, exposing Patricia's crimes while protecting me from her attempts to steal my inheritance. The hidden room had contained more than just evidence, it had contained justice. The arrest happened exactly as Sarah had predicted. I watched from the courthouse steps as federal agents approached Patricia near her silver Mercedes, their movements calm and professional in the way that suggested this was just another day's work for them. Patricia tried to maintain her dignity even as handcuffs clicked around her wrists, but the facade finally cracked when she saw the news cameras that had somehow materialized to capture her perp walk. Agent Sandra Martinez, the lead investigator on the case, had been coordinating with Uncle Sam for over a year before his death. She approached me as Patricia was being loaded into an unmarked sedan, her badge gleaming against her dark suit. Your great-uncle was one of the most thorough civilian cooperators I've ever worked with, she said, extending her hand. He understood that building a federal case requires patience and meticulous documentation. Without his evidence, Patricia Chen might have gotten away with this for years. The scope of the federal investigation was even broader than I had realized. Patricia wasn't just stealing from my family, she was part of a network that had been manipulating construction bids across 3 states, involving dozens of companies and millions of dollars in fraudulent contracts. Uncle Sam's evidence had provided the missing pieces that allowed federal investigators to understand how the entire operation worked. She was what we call a field operative, Agent Martinez explained as we watched the news crews pack up their equipment. Someone who married into or established relationships with legitimate businesses, then fed information to criminal organizations that used it to manipulate bids and steal contracts. Your family's company was just one of several targets, but it was probably the most valuable because of its reputation and client base. Tyler and Madison were not arrested, but they were detained for questioning about their knowledge of their mother's activities. I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and pity watching them being led away by investigators. They had spent years benefiting from stolen money while treating me like an unwelcome intruder in their perfect family. Now they were discovering that their entire lifestyle had been built on criminal proceeds that would be subject to forfeiture proceedings. David emerged from the courthouse looking like a man who had aged 10 years in a single morning. His face was gray with shock and exhaustion, and he moved with the uncertain gait of someone who no longer trusted the ground beneath his feet. When he saw me standing with Agent Martinez, he stopped walking and just stared, as if he was trying to process how his 18-year-old daughter had somehow orchestrated the destruction of his entire world. "Emma," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I don't understand what just happened in there. How did you know about all this? How long have you been planning this?" I looked at my father, really looked at him for the first time in years. He seemed smaller somehow, diminished by the realization that the woman he had trusted with his heart and his business had been systematically betraying both. The man who had chosen Patricia's version of family over his own daughter was now discovering that he had been as much a victim of her manipulation as I had been. "I didn't plan any of this, Dad," I said, using a term I hadn't called him in months. "Uncle Sam did. He saw what was happening to our family long before any of us understood it. He spent the last year of his life documenting Patricia's crimes and building a case to protect what Grandpa built." David's face crumpled as the full weight of his situation hit him. "She's been stealing from the company this whole time. Everything I worked for, everything Dad and Uncle Sam built, she was selling it to our competitors, and I never saw it. I was so focused on making her happy, on blending our families, that I didn't notice my own business was being gutted." The admission carried the weight of genuine remorse, but it came too late to undo the damage that had been done. David had made his choices over the past 4 years, prioritizing his new wife's comfort over his daughter's well-being, and those choices had consequences that extended far beyond his personal relationships. Rodriguez Construction would survive, but it would take years to rebuild the trust and reputation that Patricia's crimes had damaged. Agent Martinez handed David a business card and explained that he would need to cooperate fully with the ongoing investigation. While he wasn't considered a criminal suspect, his management of the company during the period when Patricia was stealing from it would be scrutinized extensively. Every contract, every financial decision, every personnel choice would be examined to determine whether he had been willfully blind to obvious warning signs or genuinely unaware of his wife's criminal activities. "The good news is that your daughter will retain ownership of the company," Agent Martinez told David. "Samuel Rodriguez's will is legally sound, and the assets that Patricia attempted to steal will be returned to their rightful owner. The bad news is that rebuilding Rodriguez Construction's reputation will require acknowledging that the company was compromised by criminal activity during your management period." I watched my father process this information, seeing him struggle with the realization that his business career was effectively over. Even if criminal charges weren't filed against him, no client would trust a construction company that had been infiltrated by corporate spies. The Rodriguez name, which had been synonymous with integrity in Portland's construction industry for 3 generations, would forever be associated with the scandal that was about to dominate local business news for months. 3 weeks later, I sat in the mansion's library, surrounded by the legitimate business documents that Patricia had tried to steal or destroy. The hidden room had been emptied of its contents, which were now part of the federal evidence file, but Uncle Sam's regular filing cabinets contained decades of honest business records that told the real story of Rodriguez Construction's success. Marcus Chen, the private investigator who had helped Uncle Sam build the case against Patricia, had agreed to help me transition into my new role as the company's owner. His first recommendation was brutal but necessary. I needed to fire everyone who had been hired during Patricia's influence and conduct thorough background checks on all remaining employees to ensure that no other corporate spies had infiltrated the organization. Your stepmother wasn't working alone, Marcus explained, spreading personnel files across Uncle Sam's desk. Corporate espionage operations like this typically involve multiple operatives placed in different positions throughout the target organization. She was the primary asset because of her access to your father, but there were probably others feeding information to the same network. The investigation revealed 2 additional employees who had been hired on Patricia's recommendation and had been providing information about Rodriguez Construction's operations to competing firms. Both were arrested as part of the expanding federal case, but their presence in the company meant that virtually every project undertaken during the past 3 years had been compromised to some degree. Rebuilding the company meant starting almost from scratch. I kept the core group of employees who had been with Rodriguez Construction since before Patricia's arrival, but nearly half the workforce had to be replaced. The financial audit required by the federal investigation revealed the true extent of the damage. Patricia's theft had cost the company not just the money she had stolen directly, but millions more in lost contracts and damaged relationships with clients who had been burned by the information she had sold to competitors. The mansion became my operational headquarters as I worked to salvage what remained of the family business. The library where Uncle Sam had spent his final years documenting Patricia's crimes was transformed into a war room where I coordinated with lawyers, accountants, and federal investigators to untangle the web of deception that had nearly destroyed everything my grandfather had built. Sarah Kim proved invaluable during this period, helping me navigate the complex legal requirements of taking over a business while simultaneously cooperating with multiple federal investigations. Her expertise in corporate law was matched by her understanding of the emotional toll that rebuilding from betrayal could take on someone who was still learning how to run a business. Your great-uncle chose you as his heir for reasons that had nothing to do with blood relationships, Sarah told me during one of our strategy sessions. He saw in you the qualities that built this company originally: integrity, determination, and the ability to see through deception to underlying truth. Patricia thought she was targeting a vulnerable family business, but she was actually attacking someone who had been preparing for this fight his entire life. The federal trial began 6 months after Patricia's arrest, and it was a masterpiece of prosecutorial efficiency. The evidence Uncle Sam had collected was supplemented by testimony from other victims of the corporate espionage network, creating a comprehensive picture of systematic fraud that had affected dozens of companies across multiple states. Patricia's role as a field operative was just one piece of a criminal enterprise that had been operating for over a decade. I testified on the 3rd day of the trial, describing how Patricia had systematically worked to isolate me from my family while positioning herself to steal the inheritance that Uncle Sam eventually left me. The prosecutor used my testimony to demonstrate how Patricia's personal crimes were connected to the larger conspiracy, showing that her manipulation of my family was part of a calculated strategy to gain control over Rodriguez Construction's operations and client relationships. Patricia's defense attorney tried to portray her as a devoted mother who had made poor choices to secure her children's future, but the evidence was too overwhelming to support any claim of good intentions. The recordings Uncle Sam had made revealed her discussing specific strategies for stealing from the company and eliminating potential obstacles to her plans. There was no way to present systematically documented fraud as the impulsive actions of a desperate parent. Tyler and Madison were called as witnesses for the prosecution, testifying about their mother's discussions of family business that they now realized had been criminal conspiracies. Both had been granted immunity in exchange for their cooperation, but their testimony revealed the extent to which they had benefited from their mother's crimes while remaining willfully ignorant of where their privileges were coming from. The most devastating moment of the trial came when prosecutors played the recording of Patricia's conversation, where she had discussed eliminating the Rodriguez family's control over their own business. Her voice filled the courtroom as she coldly analyzed different strategies for stealing my inheritance, while ensuring that her children would inherit a company that she had been systematically looting for years. Patricia was convicted on all counts: wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, and racketeering. The judge sentenced her to 18 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for at least 12 years. Her assets were forfeited to compensate the victims of her crimes, including the house she had shared with my father and the college funds she had established for Tyler and Madison using stolen money. Tyler and Madison faced their own consequences, though they avoided criminal charges. The college educations that Patricia had purchased with stolen money were interrupted when their funding was frozen as part of the forfeiture proceedings. Both were forced to find work while pursuing their education through community college programs, discovering for the first time what it meant to support themselves without criminal proceeds. David lost everything except his freedom. The divorce Patricia had initiated was finalized while she was in federal prison, leaving him with massive legal debts and a reputation that made it impossible to find work in Portland's construction industry. He eventually moved to Seattle, where he found employment with a small contracting firm that specialized in residential renovations. We maintained minimal contact, exchanging holiday cards and brief phone calls that never addressed the years when he had chosen Patricia's version of family over his own daughter. The mansion became my permanent home as I worked to rebuild Rodriguez construction from the ground that Patricia's crimes had nearly destroyed. The hidden room that Uncle Sam had used to document her betrayal was converted into a conference room where I met with the honest employees who formed the core of the company's new workforce. The library remained largely unchanged, serving as a reminder of the man who had sacrificed his final years to ensure that justice would prevail. Rebuilding the company took 3 years of careful work, but the effort was worth every sleepless night and stressful negotiation. Rodriguez Construction emerged from the scandal stronger and more successful than it had been before Patricia's infiltration, with a reputation for integrity that attracted clients who valued honesty over the kind of corner-cutting that had made the company vulnerable to corporate espionage in the first place. The insurance settlement from Patricia's crimes provided the capital needed to expand operations and pursue larger projects than the company had ever attempted. I used some of the money to establish a scholarship fund at Portland State University for students studying business ethics and corporate fraud prevention, ensuring that Uncle Sam's final battle would continue to protect other families from the kind of betrayal we had experienced. 5 years after Patricia's arrest, I stood in the mansion's garden where Uncle Sam had suffered his heart attack, watching workers break ground for Rodriguez Construction's new headquarters building. The project was being built on land that had belonged to our family for 4 generations, using plans that incorporated sustainable design principles Uncle Sam had believed were the future of the construction industry. The building would serve as both Rodriguez Construction's operational center and a monument to the man who had sacrificed everything to protect our family's legacy. A bronze plaque near the entrance would commemorate Samuel Rodriguez's service to his community and his family, though it would not mention the final year he had spent documenting criminal activity and building the case that saved everything our grandfather had built. As I watched the construction crews work, I thought about the photographs that Patricia had burned in her desperate attempt to erase my connection to the Rodriguez family. Those images were gone forever, but the legacy they represented had not only survived but thrived. Uncle Sam had been right when he said that some things cannot be stolen, cannot be burned, and cannot be erased by people who mistake cruelty for strength. The hidden room had revealed more than just evidence of Patricia's crimes. It had revealed the depth of one man's determination to protect the people and principles he loved. Uncle Sam had given me not just an inheritance, but the tools to defend it and the wisdom to use those tools responsibly. The woman who had tried to destroy my family had instead led me to discover strength I never knew I possessed. Patricia would spend the next 12 years in federal prison, where she would have plenty of time to contemplate the spectacular failure of her criminal enterprise. Tyler and Madison would eventually rebuild their lives through honest work, learning values that their mother had never taught them. David would find peace in his new life, though he would never fully recover from the shame of having been so thoroughly deceived by someone he trusted. And I would continue the work that Uncle Sam had started, building something that could not be stolen, could not be burned, and could not be erased by people who confused manipulation with intelligence. The Rodriguez family legacy would continue, stronger than ever, protected by the truth that had been hidden behind a wall of books, and preserved by a man who understood that justice sometimes requires patience, preparation, and the courage to trust that good will ultimately triumph over evil. The mansion's library still smelled like vanilla and old stories, but now it also carried the scent of new beginnings and hard-won wisdom. Uncle Sam's books remained on their shelves, but they were joined by new volumes about business ethics, criminal justice, and the kind of leadership that builds rather than destroys. The hidden room was gone, but its contents had served their purpose, exposing the truth and protecting the innocent while ensuring that crime would not triumph over integrity. As the sun set behind Portland's skyline, casting long shadows across the construction site that would become our new headquarters, I smiled with the kind of quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing that justice has been served and the future is secure. Patricia had burned my photographs thinking she was erasing my past, but she had actually led me to discover a destiny that was bigger and more meaningful than anything she could have destroyed. The Rodriguez family would continue to build, to create, and to serve their community with the kind of integrity that makes crime impossible to sustain. And somewhere in the growing darkness, the spirit of Samuel Rodriguez rested easily, knowing that his final battle had been won, and his family's legacy was secure for generations to come. 10 years have passed since that gray Friday morning, when Patricia's world collapsed in a Portland courthouse. Today I stand in the
boardroom of Rodriguez Construction's gleaming new headquarters, looking out at a city skyline that our company helped shape. The view from the 40th floor encompasses not just Portland's downtown district, but the future that Uncle Sam envisioned when he sacrificed his final years to protect our family's legacy. The company has grown beyond anything my grandfather could have imagined when he started Rodriguez Construction with nothing but determination and a borrowed truck. We now employ over 300 people across 4 states, specializing in sustainable commercial development and infrastructure projects that prioritize environmental responsibility alongside economic success. The values that Uncle Sam instilled in me during those Sunday afternoon conversations have become the foundation of a business philosophy that attracts clients who understand that true success cannot be built on deception or exploitation. This morning's board meeting concluded with the approval of our largest project to date, a mixed-use development in downtown Seattle that will combine affordable housing with commercial space and green technology showcases. The contract is worth $200 million, representing the kind of transformational project that defines a company's reputation for generations. As I signed the documents that would officially begin construction, I thought about Uncle Sam's belief that buildings should serve communities rather than simply generating profit for their developers. The irony is not lost on me that Patricia's attempts to destroy my connection to the Rodriguez family ultimately led to my becoming the most successful member of that family in 3 generations.
Her systematic campaign to erase my mother's memory and eliminate my inheritance created the circumstances that allowed Uncle Sam to recognize the threat she represented and take action to protect everything our family had built. The woman who burned my photographs thinking she was destroying my past actually provided the catalyst that secured my future. Rodriguez Construction's success has allowed me to establish the Samuel Rodriguez Foundation, which provides scholarships for first-generation college students pursuing careers in construction, engineering, and sustainable development. The foundation has awarded over $5 million in educational grants, helping young people from working-class families access opportunities that might otherwise remain beyond their reach. Uncle Sam would have appreciated the symmetry using the wealth that Patricia tried to steal to create opportunities for people who understand the value of honest work. The foundation's headquarters occupy the ground floor of our building, in a space that was specifically designed to honor Uncle Sam's memory while serving the community he loved. The walls display photographs from Rodriguez Construction's history, including images of my grandfather's early projects and my mother's involvement in the company's charitable activities. The photos that Patricia destroyed have been replaced by new images that tell the continuing story of a family business that survived betrayal and emerged stronger than ever. Patricia herself remains in federal prison with 7 years remaining on her sentence. According to reports from the Bureau of Prisons, she has spent her incarceration maintaining her innocence and blaming Uncle Sam for orchestrating what she describes as an elaborate conspiracy to frame her for crimes she claims never occurred. Her delusion appears to be complete. Even faced with overwhelming evidence of her guilt, she continues to believe that she was the victim of a sophisticated plot rather than the architect of her own destruction. Tyler and Madison have both rebuilt their lives, though neither has ever acknowledged the role their mother's crimes played in funding their privileged childhoods. Tyler eventually graduated from Portland State University with a degree in business administration, working nights and weekends to pay for his education after his mother's assets were forfeited. He now manages a small accounting firm in Vancouver, Washington, specializing in tax preparation for working-class families. We have no contact, but mutual acquaintances report that he has become a responsible adult who understands the value of earning what he receives. Madison followed a different path, using her experience with social media to build a career in digital marketing for nonprofit organizations. She has worked with several foundations that serve victims of white-collar crime, though she has never publicly acknowledged her mother's conviction or her own family's experience with financial fraud. Her Instagram account, once filled with images of expensive possessions purchased with stolen money, now showcases her volunteer work and advocacy for criminal justice reform. The irony of her career choice suggests either genuine personal growth or a sophisticated form of public relations designed to distance herself from her mother's crimes. David has found a kind of peace in his new life in Seattle, where he works for a small residential construction company that specializes in home renovations for elderly clients. His work focuses on accessibility modifications and safety improvements, projects that allow him to use his construction skills in service of people who need help rather than corporations seeking profit. We maintain a cordial relationship, exchanging holiday cards and occasional phone calls, though we have never directly discussed the years when Patricia's manipulation damaged our relationship beyond repair. The transformation in David's character has been remarkable to observe from a distance. The man who once prioritized his new wife's happiness over his daughter's well-being has become someone who finds satisfaction in helping vulnerable people maintain their independence and dignity. His current employer describes him as one of their most compassionate and reliable workers, someone who treats every client's home like it belongs to his own family. Perhaps losing everything he thought he valued allowed him to discover what actually mattered. Agent Sandra Martinez, who led the federal investigation that exposed Patricia's crimes, has become an unexpected friend and advisor.
She retired from the FBI 3 years ago and now works as a consultant for corporations seeking to protect themselves from internal fraud and corporate espionage. Her expertise has been invaluable as Rodriguez Construction has grown, helping us implement security measures that prevent the kind of infiltration that nearly destroyed the company during Patricia's tenure. Your great-uncle was remarkable, Sandra told me during a recent conversation at her Portland office. Most civilian cooperators get emotionally involved and compromise investigations by acting impulsively. Sam remained patient and methodical for over a year, documenting everything while maintaining his cover as a dotty old man who didn't understand what was happening around him. His self-control saved not just your inheritance, but probably several other companies that were being targeted by the same criminal network. The criminal network that Patricia served was ultimately dismantled through prosecutions in 7 states, resulting in over 40 convictions and the recovery of more than $50 million in stolen assets. The investigation revealed that corporate espionage in the construction industry was far more sophisticated and widespread than law enforcement had previously understood, leading to new federal legislation and enforcement protocols designed to protect legitimate businesses from infiltration by organized crime. Sarah Kim has become both my personal attorney and one of my closest friends, helping me navigate the complex legal and business challenges that come with running a major construction company. Her expertise extends far beyond legal advice. She has become a trusted counselor who helps me understand the psychological and emotional aspects of leadership in an industry that remains dominated by men who often underestimate young women in positions of authority. You've accomplished something that most people never manage, Sarah observed during a recent lunch meeting. You've transformed trauma into wisdom, betrayal into strength, and loss into purpose. Patricia thought she was stealing your inheritance, but she actually gave you something much more valuable, the knowledge that you can survive anything, and the determination to ensure that other people don't suffer the same kind of betrayal. The mansion where Uncle Sam spent his final years planning Patricia's downfall has been converted into a conference center and museum that celebrates the history of Portland's construction industry. The hidden room where he documented Patricia's crimes has been preserved as an exhibit about corporate fraud prevention, though visitors are not told the specific details of the case that made its preservation necessary. The library remains largely unchanged, serving as a quiet space where business leaders and community members can reflect on the importance of integrity in professional relationships. Rodriguez Construction's corporate culture has been shaped by the lessons learned from Patricia's betrayal. Every employee undergoes extensive background checks, and the company has implemented multiple layers of financial oversight that make embezzlement virtually impossible. More importantly, we have created an environment where ethical concerns can be raised without fear of retaliation, ensuring that any future attempts at infiltration or fraud will be detected and addressed before they can cause significant damage. The company's employee handbook includes a section titled The Rodriguez Standard, which outlines the ethical principles that guide all business decisions. The standard emphasizes honesty, transparency, and community service, values that Uncle Sam believed were essential for sustainable success in any industry. New employees attend orientation sessions where they learn not just about company policies and procedures, but about the history and values that make Rodriguez Construction different from its competitors. Our commitment to ethical business practices has attracted attention from industry organizations and academic institutions that study corporate governance and fraud prevention. The Harvard Business School has developed a case study based on Patricia's infiltration of Rodriguez Construction and Uncle Sam's response to her crimes, using our experience to teach future business leaders about the importance of vigilance and the courage required to confront internal threats. The case study, titled Hidden Rooms and Family Secrets, Corporate Espionage and the Power of Documentation, has become required reading in several graduate business programs.
Students analyze Uncle Sam's methodical approach to gathering evidence while maintaining operational security, learning about the patience and strategic thinking required to build cases against sophisticated criminals who exploit trust and family relationships. My role as a guest lecturer at Portland State University's Business School has allowed me to share Uncle Sam's lessons with young people who are just beginning their careers. I focus not on the specific details of Patricia's crimes, but on the broader principles of ethical leadership and the importance of creating organizational cultures that prioritize integrity over short-term profit. The students are always surprised to learn that the most effective weapon against corporate fraud is often the simplest, honest communication and careful documentation of suspicious activities. The scholarship recipients from the Samuel Rodriguez Foundation often attend these lectures, and their questions reveal both wisdom and idealism that give me hope for the future of American business. These young people understand that success without integrity is ultimately meaningless, and they are committed to building careers that serve their communities while providing financial security for their families. Uncle Sam would have been proud to see his values being passed on to a new generation of leaders. The Foundation's annual gala has become one of Portland's premier charity events, attracting business leaders, community activists, and political figures who support our mission of expanding educational opportunities for deserving students. This year's keynote speaker was Maria Santos, a Rodriguez Foundation scholarship recipient who graduated from Oregon State University with a degree in civil engineering and now works on water infrastructure projects in rural communities throughout the Pacific Northwest. Maria's speech brought tears to my eyes as she described how the Foundation's support had not only funded her education but given her the confidence to pursue a career that combined technical expertise with social responsibility. The Rodriguez Foundation didn't just pay for my college, she told the audience. It taught me that success means building something that makes other people's lives better, not just accumulating wealth for its own sake. After the gala, I returned to the mansion's library, where I often spend quiet evenings reading and reflecting on the journey that brought me to this point. The room still smells like vanilla and old paper, though it now also carries the scent of fresh flowers from the garden that has been restored to its original beauty. Uncle Sam's books remain on their shelves, joined by new volumes about sustainable development, ethical leadership, and the kind of business practices that create lasting value for communities and families. The photograph that survived Patricia's attempt to destroy my family's history sits on Uncle Sam's old desk, now framed and protected behind museum-quality glass. The image is faded and partially damaged, but it still shows Uncle Sam's hand pointing toward the wall where the hidden room entrance was concealed. The photograph serves as a reminder that truth has a way of surviving even the most determined attempts to destroy it, and that justice sometimes requires patience, courage, and the wisdom to recognize when the time has come to act. Looking back on the decade that has passed since Patricia's arrest, I am struck by how completely Uncle Sam's vision has been realized. He wanted to protect our family's legacy and ensure that the values that built Rodriguez Construction would survive the threat that Patricia represented. But his legacy extends far beyond the preservation of a single business. He created a model for how individuals can resist corruption and defend the principles that make communities strong and prosperous. The Rodriguez Construction of today bears little resemblance to the company that Patricia tried to steal. We have grown not just in size and revenue, but in purpose and impact. Our projects create jobs, revitalize neighborhoods, and demonstrate that profitable businesses can also be forces for positive social change. The sustainable development principles that guide our work have influenced industry standards throughout the Pacific Northwest, proving that environmental responsibility and economic success are not competing priorities but complementary goals. As I prepare to leave the library and return to my apartment in the mansion's converted carriage house, I think about the young woman who sat in the same room 10 years ago, surrounded by evidence of betrayal and uncertain about her ability to seek justice against people who seemed more powerful and sophisticated than she was. That frightened teenager has become someone who employs hundreds of people, influences industry practices, and uses her success to create opportunities for others who face the same kinds of obstacles she once confronted. The transformation has not been easy or automatic. Building a successful business while maintaining ethical standards requires constant vigilance and the courage to make difficult decisions that prioritize long-term integrity over short-term profit. There have been moments when competitors have offered shortcuts or when clients have requested services that would compromise our values, and each of these situations has required careful consideration of what Uncle Sam would have done in similar circumstances. The answer has always been the same: choose the path that allows you to sleep peacefully, knowing that your success has not come at the expense of other people's well-being or dignity. Uncle Sam understood that wealth and power are meaningless unless they are used to create something lasting and beneficial, something that makes the world a little better than it was before you arrived. Patricia's final appeal was denied by the Supreme Court 6 months ago, confirming that she will serve her complete sentence without possibility of early release. The decision marked the end of a legal process that had consumed over a decade, but it also represented a final vindication of Uncle Sam's belief that patience and preparation would ultimately triumph over greed and deception. The woman who burned my photographs thinking she was erasing my connection to the Rodriguez family will spend the remainder of her incarceration knowing that her crimes not only failed but strengthened the very legacy she tried to destroy. As I turn off the library lights and lock the mansion's front door, I smile with the quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing that Uncle Sam's sacrifice has been honored and his vision has been realized. The hidden room is gone, but its contents served their purpose, exposing the truth and protecting the innocent while demonstrating that crime cannot ultimately triumph over integrity and determination. Tomorrow will bring new challenges and opportunities as Rodriguez construction continues to grow and evolve. There will be difficult decisions to make, complex problems to solve, and the ongoing responsibility of ensuring that our success continues to benefit the communities we serve. But tonight, I rest easily knowing that the foundation Uncle Sam built, not just in business terms, but in moral and ethical terms, is strong enough to support whatever the future may bring. The Rodriguez family legacy is secure, protected not by hidden rooms and secret documents, but by the values and principles that guide every decision we make. Uncle Sam's final battle has been won, and his great niece has proven worthy of the trust he placed in her during those long Sunday afternoons when he shared the wisdom that would ultimately save everything our family had built. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, 15 years after Patricia's conviction. The return address showed the Federal Correctional Institution in Dublin, California, written in handwriting I recognized despite the years that had passed. Patricia was requesting a meeting, claiming she had information about additional crimes that had never been prosecuted and expressing what she described as genuine remorse for the damage her actions had caused to our family. I sat in my office overlooking the Portland skyline, holding the letter while considering whether Patricia deserved any response at all. Agent Martinez, now in her 70s but still sharp as ever, had warned me that inmates sometimes manufactured stories about additional crimes as a strategy to reduce their sentences or gain privileges within the prison system. Patricia's sudden discovery of remorse seemed suspiciously convenient, especially since she had maintained her innocence throughout her trial and appeals process. The letter itself was carefully crafted, acknowledging specific details about her crimes while expressing understanding of the pain she had caused Tyler, Madison, David and me. She claimed that her time in prison had given her perspective on the choices she had made and the lives she had damaged through her pursuit of what she now recognized as meaningless material wealth. The tone was humble and penitent, exactly what someone might expect from a woman who had genuinely learned from her mistakes and wanted to make amends. But I remembered Patricia's voice on Uncle Sam's recordings, cold and calculating as she discussed strategies for stealing my inheritance and eliminating my connection to the Rodriguez family. I remembered watching her burn my photographs while wearing an expression of satisfaction that suggested she enjoyed causing me pain. Most importantly, I remembered the years of systematic psychological manipulation designed to make me doubt my own worth and my place in my father's life. After consulting with Sarah Kim, I decided not to respond to Patricia's letter or grant her request for a meeting. Some betrayals are too fundamental to forgive, and some damage is too complete to repair through words spoken across a prison visiting room table. Patricia had made her choices with full knowledge of their consequences, and those choices had defined not just her own fate, but the trajectory of everyone who had trusted her. Instead, I used Patricia's letter as inspiration for a new initiative through the Samuel Rodriguez Foundation. We established a victim advocacy program that provides counseling and legal support for families dealing with financial crimes committed by trusted relatives or business partners. The program recognizes that white-collar crime often causes psychological trauma that extends far beyond monetary losses, requiring specialized support services that traditional victim assistance programs don't always provide. The advocacy program has helped over 200 families navigate the complex emotions and practical challenges that arise when someone they trusted betrays that trust for financial gain. Many of these families struggle with feelings of shame and self-blame, wondering how they failed to recognize warning signs that seem obvious in retrospect. The program helps them understand that sophisticated criminals like Patricia are experts at exploiting trust and manipulating emotions, making their deception almost impossible to detect until significant damage has already occurred. Uncle Sam's legacy continues to influence not just Rodriguez Construction but the entire Portland business community through initiatives that promote ethical leadership and corporate transparency. The city's Chamber of Commerce now requires all member companies to implement fraud prevention protocols based on lessons learned from cases like Patricia's infiltration of our family business. These measures have prevented numerous attempts at corporate espionage and embezzlement, protecting millions of dollars in assets and preserving the integrity of Portland's reputation as a center for honest business practices. Rodriguez Construction itself has become a model for sustainable growth and ethical leadership, regularly hosting delegations of business leaders from other cities who want to understand how companies can maintain rapid expansion while preserving the values that made them successful originally. Our approach emphasizes long-term thinking over short-term profits, community service over individual enrichment, and transparency over the kind of secrecy that allows corruption to flourish undetected. As evening settles over Portland and I prepare to leave the office where Uncle Sam's portrait watches over daily operations, I reflect on the strange journey that brought me to this moment. Patricia's attempt to destroy my connection to the Rodriguez family led me to discover strengths and capabilities I never knew I possessed, while her systematic betrayal of our trust taught me lessons about resilience and justice that no business school could have provided. The photographs she burned in her desperate attempt to erase my past have been replaced by new images that tell the continuing story of a family business that survived betrayal and emerged stronger than ever. But more importantly, they have been replaced by memories of success earned through honest work, relationships built on mutual respect, and the satisfaction that comes from using privilege and resources to create opportunities for others. Patricia remains in federal prison, where she will likely spend the remainder of her productive years contemplating the spectacular failure of her criminal enterprise. Her children have built honest lives despite the burden of their mother's crimes, while David has found peace and work that serves others rather than himself. And I have discovered that the best revenge against those who try to destroy your family is not punishment or retribution, but success so complete and meaningful that their crimes become footnotes in a much larger story about the triumph of integrity over corruption. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.